The night over the ocean was heavy, like wet iron. High above, through layers of black clouds, a passenger plane cut through the darkness. Inside, people dozed in their seats. Phone screens glowed faintly. Someone whispered to a neighbor. And nothing hinted that, in a matter of minutes, their world would end. At first came a jolt, light, as if something had struck the wing from below. Then a second, stronger, and suddenly the plane dropped, so abruptly that trays, bottles, and bags flew into the air. Through the windows, flashes of lightning tore the sky. The hum of the engines turned into a scream. Everything people thought they knew about safety shattered in a single second. The pilots fought to level the aircraft, but another flash ripped the night apart. The plane shook like a child's toy. Some prayed, some screamed, some just stared into the void, unable to believe what was happening. And then came the impact. The ocean accepted the steel body without mercy. Freezing black water burst in the cabin, sweeping everything in its path. In the darkness, there were only screams and choking sounds. The world narrowed to a few frantic seconds. Breathe, fight free, grab onto anything. A few, the lucky ones, found themselves on the surface. They clung to fragments of fuselage, to suitcases, to anything that would float. The storm drove them toward a distant, dark shape on the horizon. An hour or two, their strength ebbed away along with their body heat. Wind whipped their faces. Waves tossed them around like toys. But at last, impact again. Not on water, but on sand. The sea spat them out onto the shore. At dawn, as the sky turned gray, they could see. 6 people lay sprawled on the wet sand. Behind them, fire and smoke rising from the sinking plane. Ahead, a green wall of jungle. They do not know where they are. They do not know what this island is. They don't even know who among them has survived. But they know one thing. Their world ended that night. And a new one began right here on the cold sand among wreckage and salt foam. When the first rays of sunlight touched the shore, the sea looked like molten glass. The sand was cold, sticky with salt. 6 people lay motionless, like discarded dolls. Only their breathing, shallow and uneven, betrayed the fact that they were still alive. Slowly, they began to regain consciousness. First came the feeling of pain, every inch of their bodies bruised, scraped, and stung by the salt like fire. Then came the realization that the silence around them was unnatural. No sound of engines, no crew, no rescuers. Only the ocean, the sand, and the green wall of jungle ceiling off the horizon. They raised their heads and looked at one another as if seeing human faces for the first time. 6 strangers thrown together by a catastrophe. Everyone else who had been on the plane was gone. That was the moment when the first introductions happened, without a single word. Alexei, tall, lean, his face marked with the kind of lines that speak of a past without saying a word. A former Marine. He was the first to stand, as if his body already knew that in any disaster the first rule is to get back on your feet. Beside him sat Sophia, slender, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered against her face. There was no panic in her eyes, only a strange, deliberate calm. In a world of screaming, she knew how to think. Then there was Diego, the pilot who had kept his hands on the controls until the very last second. Now he lay on his side, face pale, clutching at his broken leg. Pain sharpened his gaze, but there was no fear in it. A short distance away, 2 girls, Maria and Karen. Yesterday they had been laughing, filming each other on their phones, talking about their vacation. Today their lips trembled, their hands were covered in cuts, and their eyes held only one silent question. Why are we alive when the others aren't? And the last one, Nathan, barely 20, thin, headphones still hanging around his neck, though they no longer played any music. He sat on the sand with his arms wrapped around his knees, staring not at the others but at the ocean, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to come back for them. The only thing they had in common was that none of them knew what to do next. Time passed strangely slowly. At first they just sat there. Then, staggering, they began to rise, to look around. Ahead of them, endless jungle. Behind them, the vast black infinity of the ocean. No rescuers. No wreckage that could tell them where they were. Not a single speck on the horizon. Only heat exhaustion, and a suffocating silence. And in that silence, just as they were beginning to believe they were alone, a sound came from deep within the green wall. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, guttural roar. Something not human. Everyone froze. They didn't know what was hiding behind that wall of trees, but the sound told them one thing. The island was not empty. And from that moment on, fear became their constant companion. From that morning on, time began to stretch like rubber. They no longer knew what hour it was, or even what day of the week. There was only the sun burning their skin by day and the darkness at night, alive, breathing. On the first day, they walked along the shore, hoping to find more survivors or pieces of cargo. But the beach was empty. Only the waves delivered debris and suitcases, reeking of sea and death. Sometimes they found clothes. Sometimes photographs, children's toys. But never people. The 6 of them were alone with this place. By noon, the sun had turned the sand into a sheet of scorching glass. Salt burned in every cut. Lips cracked. And they understood water was everything. They wandered along the edge of the forest until Alexei stumbled upon a stream. Cold water, cloudy and smelling of leaves, tasted better than any wine. They drank from their cupped hands, not thinking, not caring whether it was safe. While some drank, others cried. Once thirst was pushed back, hunger took its place. And then they learned for the first time that survival is nothing like a movie. At first, they hoped the scattered suitcases would feed them. But inside there was everything except food. Creams, phones, books, clothes, things that mattered back in the city. But here meant nothing. The only real find was a handful of coconuts, knocked down by the wind. Enough to keep them from collapsing, nothing more. As the sun tilted toward the horizon, Alexei made everyone stop. He understood that once darkness fell, the jungle would become a black abyss. They gathered branches and made a fire. The fire was small, smoky, but in its light, they felt a little less defenseless. Maria and Karen sat together, clutching each other like children. Sophia, as always, stayed silent, eyes fixed on the forest as if she was counting something in her head. Diego tried to bind his leg with a belt he had found on the beach. Nathan stared into the fire, turning his broken headphones over and over in his fingers. That was how they passed their first night. Darkness on the island was not just the absence of light. It was a living beast, circling them from all sides. When the sun disappeared, the jungle came alive. Something moved in there. Something groaned. And sometimes there was laughter, like a human laugh, but too sharp, too wrong to be human. Every sound made them press themselves into the sand. No one slept. Even the fire didn't help. It felt like there were eyes watching just beyond the circle of light. Morning brought relief, but only for a moment. With the sunrise, they started walking the beach again, hoping to see, somewhere on the horizon, a shadow of a ship. But the ocean was empty. It was on the 3rd day that the truth finally sank in. No one was coming for them. You could see it in their faces. Maria stopped crying. Nathan no longer pulled out his broken phone. Even Karen was silent, though her eyes kept scanning the distance, searching for anyone. Alexei didn't say it out loud. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. There will be no rescue. In the days that followed, hunger grew stronger. They learned to smash coconuts with stones, gathered anything they could find on the sand. Crabs, seaweed, even jellyfish, risking poison. Those who had never touched dirt now ate with their hands. Those who had never worked with their hands gathered sticks to keep the fire alive. And every day fear rose, like water in a flooded house. On the 5th day, at dusk, they heard the roar again. This time it was closer, long, deep, and after it, a strange whistling, as if someone was breathing right next to them. They still didn't know what lived beyond that green wall. But now they knew one thing for certain. They were not alone on this island. These first days became a dividing line. Before them, they still believed the world remembered them. After them, there was only struggle and the endless wait for the next night. On the 6th day, their view of the island began to change. What felt like a vast prison now began to feel like a place they would have to learn to live in. And the idea didn't come from Alexei. It came from Sophia, the quiet woman who had barely spoken until now. She offered something simple. If they wanted to survive, they needed a place to come back to, a place that would give them, if not safety, at least the illusion of it. They walked along the edge of the forest for a long time until they found a small rise. From there, you could see the sea, and behind them, a wall of jungle that shielded them from the wind. The sand was dry, and a stream whispered nearby. Alexei gave a look that said, "This is the place." The others silently agreed, and so began the construction of their first camp. Each of them worked as best they could. Some carried heavy branches, some twisted vines into rope. Others gathered leaves to use as bedding. Even Maria and Karen, one so used to comfort, now hauled dry palm fronds to make the roof thicker. Diego, with his broken leg, sat on the sand, crafting hooks and sharpened sticks from pieces of metal he had scavenged. He worked in silence, with the face of someone who knows all too well what survival means. Nathan, the boy who had never even lit a campfire before, tried for the first time to coax flames from dry leaves. His fingers trembled, embers died, smoke stung his eyes. But by the end of the day, a fire burned in the center of their new camp. And in that fire came something they had almost forgotten, a sense of control over at least one small thing, a home from nothing. By evening they had a roof, crude, built from branches and leaves, but still stronger than open sky. They laid down a platform of bamboo and covered it with leaves, anything to separate themselves from the cold sand. It was the first night they didn't sleep on bare ground. The fire burned brightly, and Diego, leaning on a stick, taught them to cook the little they had, a few crabs and a handful of roots. The smell was strange, but the taste, real. It was their first hot meal since the catastrophe. As they ate, their faces began to change just a little. For the first time, there was something like confidence, the change in people. That night, they sat closer to the fire. Maria and Karen stopped trembling and, for the first time, listened to Alexei. Nathan watched his first real campfire like a child. Even Diego, leg aching, managed a faint smile. And Sophia, the one whose idea had pulled him out of chaos, sat a little apart, watching the jungle. She knew. Fire would scare off the beasts, but not those eyes that watched them from the darkness. In the morning, when the sun came up, Alexei noticed something strange. In the damp sand near the camp were footprints, not from shoes, bare, small, with thin toes. And the worst part, the tracks came out of the jungle, walked right up to the camp, and then turned back, disappearing into the trees. During the night, while they slept, someone had been there. The return of fear. Those prints erased all the fragile confidence they had built the day before. The island was not just wild, it was watching. It allowed them to live, but it reminded them, you do not belong here. From that day on, the fire burned around the clock. But no matter how many branches they fed into it, fear returned. And now it wasn't out there, behind the wall of trees. It was in the camp itself, in every heart. The fourth chapter ends in a quiet morning. They stand over the marks of bare feet, saying nothing, knowing the truth. Someone has already seen them. And whoever it is, they will come again. The fifth day on the island became a turning point. Hunger was no longer just an unpleasant feeling. It clawed at their ribs, burned in their stomachs, and twisted their thoughts into knots. Each of them could feel weakness consuming their bodies and fear consuming their minds. Alexei stood by the fire, staring toward the jungle. He understood. To sit and wait was to sign their own death sentence. "We have to go inland," he said, without lifting his eyes. But Maria, trembling, her face streaked with dirt, snapped back. "They'll rescue us. We have to wait." The argument flared quickly, words cutting deeper with every sentence. Karen stood with Maria, while the others kept silent, as if afraid that any word might be their last. Each of them saw the world differently. Alexei, hardened by war, knew that waiting meant dying. Maria clung to hope as if it were the last life raft keeping her afloat. But the more they argued, the clearer it became. Their group was starting to fracture. They were no longer just strangers. Here, in this forgotten place, They were beginning to turn into enemies. And then, in the middle of the shouting, a wild boar burst out of brush, snorting, tearing at the ground, its eyes glinting in the fading light. The sudden appearance silenced everyone. Their starving eyes turned toward the animal, and the silence took on a new meaning. Without thinking, Alexei lunged after the boar. Sophia and Diego followed close behind. The others stayed near the camp, watching from a distance. It was a desperate hunt, and none of them had ever held a weapon before. Broken branches, sharpened sticks, jagged pieces of wreckage. These were all they had. The chase was short but dangerous. The boar was fast and strong, crashing through the undergrowth and swinging its tusks. In one frantic moment, Karen was struck. Its tusk tore straight through her arm. Her scream echoed to the jungle, and for a moment the hunters froze, suddenly aware how fragile their lives really were. Victory at a price. But in the end, the boar was brought down. Its blood on the sand became a symbol of both sacrifice and hope. They carried the kill back to camp, where Maria and Sophia tended to Karen's wound. It was the first real trial they had endured together. That evening, as they gathered around the fire, a shadow flickered at the edge of the light. Someone or something was watching them. The fear that had eased for a few short days returned with double strength. The island reminded them once again they were only guests here in its dark domain. 5 days had passed, and still they did not know who to trust or who might be a threat. Every look, every movement was weighed and measured. Survival was no longer just a battle with the elements. It had become a battle with themselves. On the 7th day after the crash, they finally dared to venture deeper into the heart of the island. Leaving the camp under the watch of Alexei and Maria, for them, Sophia, Diego, Karen, and Nathan set out into the unknown. The jungle grew thicker and darker with every step. Every footfall hid a threat. Brittle branches snapping under their weight, the rustling of unseen leaves, fleeting shadows slipping between the trees. Sunlight pierced the canopy in broken shafts, leaving patches of light and shadow on the ground, as if beckoning them forward and warning them at the same time. Their path followed what seemed to be an overgrown trail, tangled with roots and wild grass. Suddenly, Karen stopped. Scattered across the ground were pieces of shattered clay pot. Someone had once lived here. Long ago, perhaps, but the discovery drove a nail into their fragile hope that the island was untouched. Hours later, they stepped out into a small clearing and saw the outlines of ancient huts. The village looked as if it had been abandoned in a hurry, decades ago. The wooden frames were covered in moss and mold. Boards creaked underfoot, and doors hung loosely on rusted hinges. Inside, the walls were covered with strange drawings. The drawings on the walls. Sophia moved closer, examining the faded images. They were crude silhouettes, ships, people holding torches, and dark figures shaped like shadows or monsters. The pictures told a story, a legend of another group who had once found themselves on this island and fought against something they could not name. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and old bones. They found animal skeletons and a few human ones, half buried in the soil. Nathan, usually silent, finally spoke. We're not the first ones to survive here. But where are they? Where did everyone go? His voice trembled. They came back to camp with supplies, edible fruits, and even a few small lizards caught in makeshift traps. But in each of their eyes was a new shadow, the feeling that something had been watching them. Noises in the night. That night, the forest was louder than ever. The sounds of rustling, of heavy breathing, of strange movements echoed from every direction. The fire burned brightly, but even its light could not chase away the sense that the darkness was alive, just a few steps away. Sophia stared at the flames in silence, her thoughts far away. The island had begun to tell them its secrets, but not all at once. They understood now. To survive here was not just to fight hunger and rain. It was to be ready for the possibility that what stalked them was far more than wild animals. By the end of the second week on the island, time had stopped being a straight line. Days blended into a cycle of heat, hunger, and nightmares. And the most frightening thing of all was how they were beginning to get used to it. They were getting used to the hunger, to the fear, to the constant feeling that something was watching from beyond the wall of the jungle. Food was running out. Even after the hunt and the supplies they had found in the abandoned village, their stock vanished quickly. The coconuts were gone, the crabs had disappeared, and the small fruits gave them no strength. The fights came more often now. At first, fear had united them. Now, each person lived only for themselves. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the jungle turned into a mass of blood-red shadows, they sat around the fire. The wind was sticky, hot. No one spoke. The silence pressed down heavier than hunger. Alexei, sitting closest to flames, felt at first something was wrong. Too quiet. Even the cicadas had fallen silent. Late that night, after the others had fallen asleep, Nathan opened his eyes. The firelight cast restless shadows across his face. He stared at the small bag that held the last of their food, a few dried fruits and a strip of meat from the boar. His hands were shaking. Hunger and fear outweighed everything else. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, he rose. He took the bag as if it was his last chance at life, and without looking back, vanished into the jungle. It was as if the island itself sensed a betrayal. Minutes later, the wind rose. Thunder cracked the sky apart. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground into mud. They woke to the noise, and the first thing they saw was the empty spot where Nathan had been, and the bag of food, gone with him. And then it happened. First came the sound, the snapping of branches, then rapid footsteps, heavy breathing. And suddenly, from out of the darkness, shadows crashed into the camp. The fire exploded in sparks. Something, human in shape but far too fast, darted between the huts. No faces, no words, only blows, whistling through the air and animal-like growls. Alexei threw himself forward to defend the camp, but even he understood. There was no target, only movement and silhouettes. Maria screamed. Karen tried to hide. Diego, leaning on a stick, swung a broken plank with all his strength. The storm grew worse with every passing moment. Lightning tore holes in the darkness, revealing fragments of chaos. Mud, blood, terrified eyes. The attackers didn't stay. They came suddenly and vanished just as quickly, melting back into the jungle as if they had never been there. When it was over, the fire was gone. The camp was in ruins. They sat on the wet ground, shaking, unable to understand what had just happened. Only one thing was clear. They were not alone anymore. And before they feared nature, now they knew. Something much worse lived on this island. At dawn, they searched the camp. Several things were missing. The last of the food, tools, even clothing. The tracks left in the mud were human. Small bare feet, quick and light. Nathan was nowhere to be found. They did not know if he had fled deeper into the island, or if those who attacked had found him first. That day, everything changed. Trust was gone. Everyone now slept with a stick or a sharp stone in their hand. And for the first time since the crash, no one spoke about rescue. Because rescue is only possible when the enemy is outside. And they understood now. The enemy was already here. That night marked the beginning of a new world. A world where fear no longer left them, even in daylight. Weeks passed. Rain gave way to heat, heat to cold nights. They stopped counting the days, until one morning, as Sophia carved another mark into a piece of bamboo. She said quietly, 47. By then, the island had become a part of them. Every bush, every path was familiar, and yet they always felt something at their backs, something you could only glimpse from the corner of your eye, the calm before the end. More than a month had passed since the night attack. The attackers never returned, but their presence was everywhere. Gnawed animal bones, broken branches, strange markings on trees. And always, that constant feeling that invisible eyes were watching the camp. Alexei, Sophia, Diego, Maria, and Karen had survived only because they learned to work as one. Nathan was never found. Only his headphones, hanging from a branch deep in the jungle. A ship on the horizon. On the 47th day, under a clear sky and a calm sea, Karen saw it first. A white silhouette far out at sea. A ship. They screamed, ran along the sand, waving their arms. But the ship was distant. Without a signal, it would pass them by. Sophia remembered the abandoned village. One of the huts still held a stash of resin and dry branches. They ran there, grabbed everything they could carry, and dragged it back to the beach, building a huge pyre. The wind shifted, teased them, but finally the fire caught. Smoke rose above the island like a black pillar. The island strikes back, and that's when the jungle woke up again. The same shadows that had attacked at night now screamed and charged from the trees. They were people, wild, overgrown, their eyes full of madness and fear. Once, long ago, they must have been survivors too. Now, they belonged to the island. They came to tear the fire down. But hunger and fear had made the five stronger. They fought back, with sticks, with stones, with fire. And this time they did not retreat. The flames broke through the circle of attackers. The fire rose above the palm trees. Black smoke stabbed into sky. The ship had seen them. And then Alexei understood. If they didn't hold this fire now, the island would never let them go. He grabbed a burning branch and charged straight into the mob. Fire, screams, the smell of burning leaves. And in the chaos, they broke free and ran to the shore. By sunset, the ship had drawn close. An inflatable rescue boat came to the beach, and men in orange life jackets saw them at last, exhausted, filthy, with eyes too empty to cry. As the boat pulled away from the shore, they turned back to look at the island. The shadows stood at the tree line, but never crossed it. It was as if the island allowed them to leave only because they had proven they were still alive. Hours later they were hauled aboard. Warmth, water, food, it all felt like a dream. They sat in silence. No one celebrated, because as they left the island behind, they all felt the same thing. A part of them would always remain there, among the jungle and the footprints in the sand. That night, already safe on the ship, Sophia stepped out onto the deck. The sea was black and calm. She turned her head one last time, looking back at the faint dark outline of the island, fading into the horizon, and for the first time she smiled, because she knew they had survived, not because of the island, but in spite of it.